year 1939. I myself do not read poetry for anything but pleasure. I read only the poems I like. This means, of course, that I have to read a lot of poems I don't like before I find the ones I do. But when I do find the ones I do, then all I can say is, here they are, and read them to myself for pleasure. Read the poems you like reading. Don't bother whether they're important or if they'll live. What does it matter what poetry is, after all? If you want a definition of poetry, say, poetry is what makes me laugh, or cry, or yawn. What makes my toenails twinkle. What makes me want to do this, or that, or nothing, and let it go at that. All that matters about poetry is the enjoyment of it, however tragic it may be. All that matters is the eternal movement behind it, the vast undercurrent of human grief, folly, pretension, exaltation, or ignorance, however unlofty the intention of the poet. The joy and function of poetry is and was the celebration of man, which is also the celebration of God.
In the bleak midwinter, frosty windy dawn, earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow. In the bleak midwinter, long, long ago. What can I give you, old as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would give a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would play my harp. What I can I give my heart.
A Child's Christmas in Wales, by Dylan Thomas. One Christmas was so much like another in those years, around the Seatown corner now, and out of all sound except the distant speaking of the voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, that I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12.
Or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6.
All the Christmases roll down toward the two-tongued sea, like a cold and headlong moon, bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the ice-edged, fish-freezing wave.
And I plunge my hands into the snow and bring out whatever I can find.
In goes my hand into that wool-white, bell-tongued ball of holidays, resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out come Mrs. Prothero.
And the firemen.
It was on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son Jim.
It was snowing.
It was always snowing at Christmas.
December in my memory is white as Lapland, though there were no reindeers.
But there were cats. Patient, cold, and callous, our hands wrapped in socks. We waited to snowball the cats.
Sleek and long as jaguars, and horrible whiskered, sticking and snarling. They would slink inside or the white back garden walls.
And the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasined trappers from Hudson Bay,
Off Mungle's Road.
Would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes.
The wise cats never appeared. We were so still.
Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows.
Eternal ever since Wednesday. That we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden.
Or if we heard it at all, it was to us like the far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat.
And soon the voice grew louder.
Fire!
night, Mrs. Prothero.
And she beat the dinner gong.
And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms toward the house.
And smoke, indeed, was pouring out of the dining room.
And the gong was bombulating.
And Mrs. Prothero was announcing
Ruin!
like a town crier in Pompeii.
This was better than all the cats in Wales standing on the wall in a row.
We bounded into the house, laden with snowballs.
And stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room.
Something was burning, all right.
Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with the newspaper over his face.
But he was standing in the middle of the room saying,
A fine
And
Christmas.
smacking at the smoke with a slipper.
"Call the fire brigade!"
They won't be there. It's Christmas.
There was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke. And Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting.
Do something.
And we threw our snowballs into the smoke.
I think we missed Mr. Prothero.
We ran out of the house to the telephone box.
Let's call the police as well.
And the ambulance. And Ernie Jenkins. He likes fires.
We only called the fire brigade.
And soon the fire engine came. And 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house.
Nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve.
And when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered in at them.
Jim and I waited very quietly to see what she would say.
She said the right thing always. She looked at the 3 tall firemen standing in their shining helmets, and she said,
"Would you like anything to read?"
Years and years and years ago, when I was a boy, when there were wolves in Wales, and birds the color of red flannel petticoats whisked past the harp-shaped hills, before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback, it snowed and it snowed.
Well, it snowed last year, too. I made a snowman, and my brother knocked it down, and I knocked my brother down, and then we had tea.
But that was not the same snow. Our snow came shoaling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and hands and bodies of the trees.
Snow grew overnight on the roofs of the houses like a pure and grandfather moss, minutely white-ivied the walls, and settled on the postman opening the gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white, torn Christmas cards.
Were there postmen then, too?
With sprinkling eyes and wind-cherried noses, on spread frozen feet, they crunched up to the doors and mittened on them manfully. But all that the children could hear was a ringing of bells.
You mean that the postman went rat-a-tat-tat and the doors rang?
I mean that the bells that the children could hear were inside them.
Oh, I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells.
There were church bells, too.
Inside them?
No. In the black snow-white belfries. They rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the crackling sea. It seemed that all the churches boomed for joy under my window.
And the weathercocks grew for Christmas on our fence.
Get back to the postman.
We were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking, and dogs, and Christmas, and the snow. We knocked on the doors with blue knuckles.
Ours has got a black knocker.
And then we stood at the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with our breath, and jogged from foot to foot like small boys wanting to go out.
And then the presents?
And then the presents.
And the cold postman, with a rose on his button nose, tingled down the tea tray slithered run of the tea.
He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turned the corner on one foot, and by God, he was gone.
Get back to the presents.
There were the useful presents.
Mittens made from giant sloths.
Oh, blinding tam-o'-shanterns and bunny-suited busbies.
And balaclavas for victims of head-shrinking tribes.
Vermonts, who always wore wool. There were mustached and grasping vests.
It made you wonder why they had any skin left at all.
And once I had a little crutched nose bag from an aunt now, alas, no longer whinnying with us.
And pictureless books in which small boys, though warned with quotations not to, would skate on Farmer Giles's pond, and did, and drowned.
And books that told me everything about the wasp. Except why.
We'll go on to the useless presents.
Bags of moist and many-colored jelly babies.
And a false nose, and a tram conductor's cap.
And a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell.
Once, by mistake that no one could explain, a little hatchet.
And a celluloid duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound.
A mewing moo that an ambitious cat might make her wish to be a cow.
And a painting book in which I could make the grass, the trees, and the sea, and the animals any color I pleased. And still, the sky blue sheep are grazing the red field under the rainbow billed and pea green birds.
Hard boils, toffee,
Fudge and all sorts.
Crunches, crackles.
A mug.
Glaciers, marzipan.
And butter Welsh for the Welsh.
And snakes and families and happy ladders.
And a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on the wall with his stick to shake our picture off the wall.
And a packet of cigarettes. You put one in your mouth, and you stood at the corner of the street and waited for hours in vain for an old woman to scold you for smoking a cigarette. And then, with a smirk, you ate it.